I'm Dr. Anjali Bagra, Medical Director of Mayo Clinic's Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity.
And I'm Barbara Jordan, Administrator of Mayo Clinic's Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Diversity. And we are proud to present the Rise for Equity podcast.
Welcome to Mayo Clinic's Rise for Equity podcast. I'm your host, Lee Hawkins. Today, we're going to be talking about the experiences of Black male doctors in America. And with me today is Dr. Corey Ch.B, instructor and MD at Washington University in St. Louis, Dr. Lewis Roberts, professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic, and Dr. Eddie Greene, associate professor of medicine at Mayo Clinic. Welcome to you all. Now, this has been an incredible experience getting to meet and speak with you about all of the various things that you've experienced in your careers. And so I really want to demystify, first of all, the journey of what it takes to become a Black male doctor in America and actually get into some of the nuances and complexities of that experience. So I'm really excited about this. What are some of the things that people may not know about being a Black man in a white coat in America?
I think a lot of people don't know that it's actually a very fun and rewarding job to be a Black man in a white coat, but there's a lot of challenges with that. And then as far as the percentages of Black men in white coat are extremely small. And I feel like a lot of people do not know that. And especially they don't know that as far as from going back to 1900s or even that the percentages of Black males is relatively the same. And so there's been a lot of strides, especially more recently, to try to increase those numbers. But as far as the results, we still haven't made much progress. And so that's some of the things that I feel like a lot of people don't know. And I feel like we can do everyone justice by having more representation of Black males within medicine.
Yep, we're going to talk a lot about that in the coming minutes here. Go ahead.
Yes, I think I would say that it's really a fun time to be in medicine also. With the advances that we've been making in science, biomedical science, I think we've all been through this pandemic and we've seen just what we call translational science, the triumphs of translational science, the ability to go from a time in which everyone was scared of this virus to a point where we have vaccines, we have antibodies that we can give people if they develop the disease, we have drugs that are pills that we can treat people with. This is really just sort of a microcosm of all of the advances that have been made in translational science that people can be part of. And I think it's an exciting time to say to young Black boys and say, boy, there's so many ways that they can contribute and make life better for others by being part of this field and being in medicine and in science.
Dr. Greene?
Thank you. And I like my colleagues, I agree with all that they have said and would add the following. Being in medicine, and especially as a Black man, it's kind of a microcosm of what we really see in life every day. I got a chance to engage with people on multiple levels, including the pragmatic things they have to do to get their health better. I got a chance to engage with them on a more spiritual realm on occasion. And I got a chance to engage with patients and my colleagues about where the science is headed, as Dr. Roberts just mentioned, which is also very important. And to have that be a part of your everyday interactions with people, patients, and your colleagues is an incredible experience. And I think if people knew that, they would be much more intrigued by it, this kind of thing, as young Black boys, as he pointed out. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's really one of the most critical aspects because we talked earlier about the low numbers, and there has been recently a bump, right? A 21% increase in Black males in medical school. Was that the number I heard?
Yeah, so that was from 2020 to 2021. So it's just a 1 year. We only got 1 year on data point on that, but that's encouraging. at least that we're seeing some increase, and it's actually a pretty substantial increase. Now, the reasons to why the increase, there's actually some ongoing research right now. Some people, unfortunately, think it may be what we call a pandemic effect. So they're doing some research on some of these things being a pandemic effect that may not be longer lasting, but there's still, we know there's a lot of pathway programs and other type of outreach in medical schools more broadly taking a more holistic approach with medicine as far as the application process and the people that are looking to matriculate into medical school, that we may see sustained trend in this, but it'll be something that we'll just have to kind of see when more data points come out.
What do you, just anecdotally, what do you attribute it to?
I do think that medical schools are being more intentional with the process of trying to get more African Americans into medicine. So I do think, and I can kind of see that anecdotally just with at WashU, they're making a great effort. And as far as looking at, they're not just kind of just traditionally medical school, and the process of getting into was very heavily weighed on GPA and the MCAT score. But, that doesn't tell the full story, and that doesn't, let you know who you're going to be the best doctors. And so you got to take a holistic approach as far as background, obstacles, community outreach, research. There's all these other things that you should take into consideration, especially if you want to have a very diverse work group and to recruit underrepresented minorities, particularly for Black males. And so I do think, medical schools are doing a lot more of that. And I do think there's been a lot of outreach from physicians, and particularly social media. So I think social media has been a key part of this. Seeing doctors on social media, not only just doing medical knowledge, but I think one of the big things is especially for youth, is they need to see doctors being cool. It's as simple as that. So I know for me, when I was young, if I always see the doctors okay, that was the person who was, straight A's. They had a good upbringing. They had money, etc. But to see, some of the doctors who may have had rough backgrounds, or, they didn't have this straight pathway to medicine, or to just see them wear some Jordans, and then having kids be able to see, I was like, oh, wow, this guy's a doctor, but he also wears Jordans, he also listens to rap music,
right.
So having that different exposure, I think has been very key to reach out to some of these younger kids to let them know that, hey, you can do both.
And you're 31, right? Already?
Tomorrow.
Okay. So happy birthday.
Thank you.
You've already accomplished a lot. And I want to talk about biographies. I'm going to start with you because one of the things that really stood out to me was there was an article, I think around the time Trayvon Martin was killed, where you actually talked about yourself and you saw visions of yourself. You saw your reflection in his story. One of the powerful things you said was that you actually graduated in the lower half of your high school class and took the ACT a few times. And then within 2 years into college, once you got serious, you were doing an internship at Yale. And I thought it spoke really powerfully about how people can be underestimated, and a lot of the things about how sometimes the narratives that we are told or that we grow into can actually hold us back. And then when we get the opportunity, we actually seize it. And you said you were a class clown at one point.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
So, back in middle school and even high school, as far as, I was a very goofy person. Definitely was a class clown, and I was also an athlete. So as far as academics and all that stuff, I was just doing the bare minimum to get by. I was cool with my C's, and so it was a big pivot for me to try to take my academics a little more seriously. And I think one of the key things was I really felt like it was impossible to be cool and smart at the same time. And so I think my mom was even say I would try to make C's or B's on purpose because I didn't want to be considered like the nerd or the geek or things like that. So I kind of intentionally held myself back to kind of stay in this role as kind of like the class clown. So, and I see a lot of, younger students who may be the same situation, and so they may hold themselves back because, they don't want to have the stigma of, or being like a nerd or things of that nature. But,
what was it that changed?
So the thing that changed for me was my sophomore year. It was my sophomore year in high school. It was a teacher So I was in my biology class. So one of my biology teachers, actually the only black teacher that I had growing up, I was really kind of gifted in science and biology. It kind of came natural to me. Didn't really have to do much studying or anything. She kind of came up to me because I had the highest grade in the class. And so she mentioned to me, like, Corey, I was in the general biology class, not the pre-AP or AP class. And she was like, you should have taken the pre-AP class. Like, you'd have done better than most of the kids there. But I know you're not, fulfilling, your full potential. And so she talked to me about that. She was hoping that just talking to me by itself would be enough, but that wasn't enough. I just said, thank you. Okay, cool. All right. So what she did was a smart and more effective way. So she went to my parents about this. And so my parents, they had a creative way of trying to get a little bit more out of me also. So they mentioned to me that, all right, Corey, gave me an ultimatum, essentially. So they was like, all right, Corey, you can either, for the next year, take pre-AP chemistry or quit football. And so if anybody know about Texas football, it's huge. We had packed out stadiums of over 10,000 people. So this was some people, this was their prime. And so, and I was about to be one of the starting safeties. And so they knew I wasn't going to quit football. And so I ended up doing the pre-AP chemistry class. And that was a huge pivot because at my school, it's kind of split up between a diversity of about 33% Hispanic, 30% Black, and 30% white. But in the general class, like the non-pre-AP and AP classes, it was primarily all the minority kids. And so when I went into this pre-AP chemistry class, I saw people I've never seen before. It was like 2 different schools. And it was difficult. I literally had to go home and study. Beforehand, I was just school was just for school. Once I left school, I didn't do anything else. I worked and I played football. And so having to go home and actually do homework was totally different for me. And then after I finished that class, I got a B. And I was so proud of that B. Other people, they might have been, mad at themselves. I can't get into this school because it's B. But for me, I was so proud of that B because I didn't think I would even be able to get to this point. And so that was the big pivot for me because I realized that, man, learning is actually a lot of fun. And then also I can be good at it. And the reason why I probably wasn't good at it before because I just wasn't applying myself.
Yes.
And so having that teacher and that experience kind of put the light bulb in my brain that, you know what, Corey, you can do both. You can be smart and cool. And so that's kind of how that was kind of the moment that kind of changed my life.
Someone earlier said you can't be what you can't see.
Right.
And so hearing your story is inspiring a lot of young people, I'm sure, right now. Tell me about your journey. What was it that inspired you to become a doctor? I think one of the powerful things is that all of you came from some part of a village. Tell me about yours.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I grew up in Ghana in West Africa, and my family had immigrated to Ghana from Sierra Leone. So in some ways we were sort of strangers, but strangers that had been embraced in the community. My parents grew up there. Both of their parents were teachers. And actually both grandparents ended up starting high schools. And so there's a very strong tradition of education in my family. And I can really relate to some of the things Corey is saying because, I found myself, I was very curious about everything. And I always say my parents really had a hard time with me as a kid because I took apart many things that they had bought that I wasn't able to put back together, trying to figure out how these things worked. But at the same time, I really didn't apply myself that much when I was in high school. Mm-hmm. And I found myself after it's sort of equivalent to around the sophomore year of high school, where my dad was so frustrated because he didn't feel I was reaching my potential that he actually thought maybe we should hold you back a year in school, But then this is where I think peer mentoring can be really critical because one of my classmates, and I'm not sure what got into him, but he started every afternoon when he was going to go off to study, he would call me and say, hey, let's go study. So I said, okay. So I got into this habit of going to study with him and found that I was enjoying what I was studying and it was really fun. And I was learning about all those things I couldn't figure out how to put back together, more about those sorts of things. And so I kind of got the bug about studying and particularly about science. And that really sort of ended up launching me. Actually, I then subsequently, my grades began to get better. And that sort of launched me into really eventually becoming a physician and a scientist.
Powerful. Dr. Greene?
Yes. I like Dr. Shaw, I'm from Mississippi as well, from a different generation, but nevertheless, we're both from that part of the country. And I'll tell you, I think what happened initially for me is I somehow got this empathy gene, and it got expressed phenotypically, which basically means it came out. And I think it came out because, as I said to the panel, I lived with my grandfather, who was my favorite person of all time, and he had a chronic illness at the time, and we had to be involved in that to make sure that he did okay as young children, and that sort of helped. And then as you live in your community, and you say you want to be a doctor, there are people who start to josh you about it and sort of say, really? This kind of thing. And then there are other people who are encouraging. And they would start calling you young Dr. Eddie. Okay.
Okay.
And you're embarrassed, of course. But, like Dr. Shai, I thought I was an athlete and, a young scholar as well. But I realized early on, and you have to make choices in life, right? That the athletes that I grew up around were so much better than me, that I had no opportunities. I mean, I went to school with people who played in the NFL and this kind of thing. And so you start to understand I do much better by applying myself to the scientific approach, the scholarly approach and this kind of thing. And that's helped tremendously, and that's how things got started, along with other mentors who helped you to envision yourself as you asked the question about, can you see yourself doing this in a few years? And they saw it, and they helped me to see it. So that was very important.
One of the persistent themes I'm seeing is getting young Black boys into medicine starts with teachers, seeing doctors if you can, and being reinforced by peers who encourage you or who compete with you or hold you accountable. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. So I spoke on the teacher front, and I can just talk about in college. So when I went to Prairie View A&M University, it's HBCU outside of Houston, and so that was a great experience for me because I met some of my closest friends, and one of the big things was that we all kind of kept everybody accountable, and so the accountability factor and just the encouragement factor that we got from when we were in undergrad, and also the professors. So the professors, particularly at HBCU, it's kind of like open door policy. And so they really want you to be successful. And so they will kind of bring out a lot of things that you never thought you had in yourself also. And so between having very supportive professors and having a lot of great friends to kind of help you, support you, and kind of push you, has been an amazing experience. And a lot of us were very close to each other. We have a group chat. We talk every day. We do a book club, and so this is something we continue to kind of push each other and encourage each other throughout the way. So having role models and then peer groups is very good and very encouraging.
It shows the power of HBCUs because I've covered education for the past couple years, and I've seen the statistics that show the low numbers of Black male teachers, but then the outcomes that can occur when a person does have a Black male teacher early on in their life. It actually increases the likelihood that they'll go to college and increases the likelihood that they will graduate from college. And there was a time when Black people couldn't go to majority institutions, and there were so many generations of doctors that were produced through HBCUs. What are HBCUs doing that the mainstream institutions aren't?
I would say they're giving people a chance, and a chance based on many different metrics than just the typical metric of you have a high SAT score, ACT score, high MCAT, 4.0, this kind of thing. There are other metrics, such as your road traveled and the sort of challenges you've overcome in your life to be able to deal with adversity, deal with opportunity, and this kind of thing. And so that has helped tremendously. And so HBCUs have always done this and have, in addition to doing that, gone ahead and developed these jewels who do extremely well. And I think, even the majority institutions, which I went to for my undergraduate and for medical school, when they get an opportunity to reach a critical mass, the same things can happen. And when there are people there like Dr. Roberts and others who can be role models to help those kids sort of see there's a pathway, again, it's about envisioning yourself, I could conceivably do that. Whatever that is in medicine that you think you might want to do. And that's why we have neurosurgeons, nephrologists, cancer physicians, all these different people today, and we need to build on that. That momentum is very important.
And when you're in a setting where you're teaching or you're treating patients, what is it that you're encouraged by in terms of the progress that we're seeing? I know Mayo has made a $100 million commitment now over 10 years to diversity and equity and inclusion, but specifically looking at the African American population as well. Is that one of the glimmers of hope?
It is a glimmer of hope. It's an important one. And, that commitment from a financial and an institutional standpoint shows that we are wanting to do this. As Dr. Shai pointed out, in the last couple of years, and maybe 3 years or so now, since we've had the pandemic, since we had the George Floyd murder and the associated unrest in the country where people could focus on what were some of these challenges, I think institutions decided to make a commitment to, what do we really have to do to make our society better? And hopefully we can keep this going and have it be sustained and grow it enough to where we can keep people in the game, number one, and number two, get more young people deciding, I really think medicine is a place where I can be helpful to society and to help me, build a career, that kind of thing.
Someone in a panel discussion that you were featured in said thinking about a career in medicine was almost like going into space. Was that something that you could relate to? I know that you said that when you were growing up, you had a family that was really encouraging, but you probably knew Black doctors growing up, right?
Yeah, so I feel, in a sense, very fortunate in that I grew up in a family where there were several people that already were practicing medicine. So my dad actually is a physician. My mom was a public health nurse. I tell people I got more shots than I care to remember in that setting. And so to some degree, I grew up, in that culture of, yes, this is something you can do. And I might actually, several years ago, I found something that my grandfather had written. Like I mentioned that he had been a principal of a boys' high school in Freetown in Sierra Leone, and then he moved to Ghana to start the first high school in Accra. And in 1913, he had written a character sketch of one of his mentors, and there was a brief summary that was written of this character sketch in The Crisis, which was the news journal of the NAACP that was edited at the time by W.E.B. Du Bois.
Yes.
And the phrase he made in there was that it was so good and important that young Black men be able to see among their heroes stories told of people who were like them and be able to see those people as being heroic. Because he said, otherwise, the people that are teaching these young Black men are giving them stories of heroes that are of another race and of another time or of another region of the world. And he said, these teachers must see that they have a gap to reach across because they say this, he said their students must say, but that person isn't like me. Mm-hmm. And so he said it was so important that young people, young black men, be able to see models like them. And it's amazing that this was 110 years ago, and it's so relevant to us today because we're facing the same issue. We really need to build the cohort of people like Dr. Shai so that young boys can see, yes, I can be him.
It shows the power of the biography, right? Because once again, it demystifies the journey. And what's beautiful is this notion that there are teachers who took out money out of their own pocket to make sure that kids could have exposure to additional things outside of the classroom with regard to science. And there was a teacher who encouraged one of you to go into STEM at a very young age, and teachers taking kids to church. And there were lots of people investing and reinforcing and continuing to speak to kids about what their opportunities could be. And then you talked about your grandfather, and you talked about your grandfather. Was that where you derived your power from?
I would say yes. And as I talk about my grandfather, he was not an exceptionally educated individual from a school standpoint. But, there are people in the world who have incredible, I'm going to say it a third time, incredible quantities of common sense that they know how to impart to people. And I listened, intently. And like I said, in those formative years of your life when you really want to pay attention, when you were not sort of trying to go out with your friends and hang out, this kind of thing, I listened carefully. And I think I learned a lot. And so that was very helpful to me to get things started, along with my grandparents and other peers pushing you from an academic standpoint. So having both of those were very helpful. And I'm really inspired by the story that Dr. Roberts tells about what his grandfather had written in 1913 to sort of say that same thing. And it could be written today, as you pointed out, because the challenge is having people see themselves be successful. And as we look around us, sports figures are successful. I mean, we're sitting just upstairs from the Michael Jordan restaurant and bar and basketball and pitchers and everything else. But we can have the same thing with physicians and other people in medicine and scientists who are also leading in this regard and who are also doing amazing things to help change medicine. And we need that so much now.
And so many of you speak about the importance of changing it so that we're focusing on kids younger.
Right, we have to.
Right, our institution's starting to understand how important it is to get to kids younger, because if you don't get them before the 6th grade, you've lost in many ways. Not in your case, luckily, right? But having exposure to medicine and to science and STEM early is really beneficial.
Yeah, I think getting earlier is key. So a lot of what previously was been focused on is focusing on like undergrad. So at that point, like I said, it's too late, and you already kind of have a small pool of people. And so what ends up happening is a lot of these med students end up fighting for the same small pool of people. But what we really need to do is expand that pool. And how do we expand that pool is starting much earlier. So getting kids in elementary school, middle school. The big challenge is, and it seems like based on some certain programs that are starting to happen, is that the big challenge is that it costs so much money, one, and also it's an investment that's going to take a lot of time to see. People want instant gratification. They want to see the results, measure results in a couple of years, but something like this is going to take a 15-year investment, and then you can look back at it later on and see kind of the results that's happening. And so I think having different pathway programs, being very intentional, starting elementary school, middle school, will be key to really having a major increase in the numbers of particularly black men in medicine.
Dr. Greene, you mentioned athletics and the the way that children can very much see these hyper-visible symbols of athletic success and then say, well, that's what I actually want to do because that's something that I believe I'm capable of doing or something I can achieve.
Right.
But Dr. Myron Rolle is a young man who actually had a decision to make because he was drafted into the NFL, or he had an opportunity to go into the NFL draft, and he also won a Rhodes Scholarship.
Absolutely.
And he was interviewing for the Rhodes Scholarship at the time that he was drafted and chose the Rhodes Scholarship over going into the NFL draft. Is that an estimation that most people see? Because actually you make more money over time if you are the neurosurgeon that he ultimately became as opposed to entering the NFL.
So I haven't, I haven't ever talked to Dr. Rolle or know his inner thoughts about why he made that decision specifically. But if I were to imagine, I suspect he looked at the long-term propositions and said, where can I have the greatest impact? And that takes a level of sincerity and understanding of who you are. And he was already at the top of the pyramid, at the actual point of it. When you think about being a potential NFL draftee, and then being a Rhodes Scholar, and then going on to neurosurgery. So that sort of points out the kind of talent that this young man has and had. And so I think, that's a situation where any of us would be envious of getting there, but not many will be able to reach that. And I think some people make the choices based on the immediate gratification versus what can I do long term that's sustainable and will make a difference and an impact. If I could just point out one additional thing about this, I mentioned in the panel, one of the other opportunities we have as practicing physicians now, as scientists, as researchers, whenever we're put in front of patients, and they come from all different backgrounds, and especially the minority patient, there's an opportunity, and I'm sort of in my evolving thinking that we have an opportunity to help them think about how might we grow our own in our communities. I know it's a challenge, but if we can think of that concept and take it to another level where you can get the policy people to sort of think about it, along with their advocacy, we might be able to do something. And as you point out, Dr. Shai, Dr. Roberts, we can get kids early on to think about what can I do to help my community? And phrase it differently. Being a doctor is a great thing, but we need so many people in healthcare. But I think for the young Black males, changing that whole, vision of their trajectory, and then keeping them in a safe space away from the elements in our society that want to take them off of that pathway of where can I be helpful. This is a challenge for us, and I think there are some real opportunities here. And I'm glad that we have this discussion today, and we should have many more across the country like this.
Well, maybe you guys should hit the road.
Yeah, right.
What role does resilience play? Obviously, over the years, you've built it and continue to build it every day. How do you build it?
I guess I would say one encounter at a time, to some degree. But I think that that's to some degree where mentors, allies, sponsors come into play. Because I think sometimes you look at a person that's reached a certain level, and for I think all of us, it's been multiple people that have helped at different levels create spaces that are safe within which we can grow. I think that's really critical for us to think as we're looking at young Black males today, because I think that many young Black males today feel that in many of the spaces they are in, they are under threat. and being able to take them and bring them into spaces where, and I think it's important to recognize that, diversity is so critical, because the diversity of experiences, perspectives that people bring into teams is really what makes the most effective, most highly functioning teams that we have. So it's important that people be able to see that, yes, I can be part of this team, I can be safe in this team, I can contribute in this team. It's important also that people don't feel like they have to be representing anybody in that team. Sometimes we tend to think, yeah, I'm the diverse person here, I have to be, in quotes, the model minority here. But that then takes away from their own settled uniqueness. And it's really important that we create these spaces where people can be themselves, because when they're their authentic selves, we can see their most creative expressions. And it's important to recognize also that in teams are richest when we have people of different personalities. So we do these personality type inventories, and we see that there's people that have different personalities innately. Those personalities aren't innate to any particular race or ethnic group. And so if we have enough people that are minority in spaces, then that allows people to be free to be themselves. And so, they're not being the representative of any particular race, they're just being their own unique self. So I think there's a particular challenge there for institutions, for communities, for industry, for the academic community, in terms of thinking about how we create the spaces to best maximize the contributions of Black males.
Sometimes people come in and they're surprised to see you, that you're the doctor. Tell me about that.
Well, you walk into a room and perhaps a patient has never met and or known or interacted with a Black male, and especially in the medical profession, and especially as a person who is leading the team of physicians or healthcare providers that you're having, and they're somewhat shocked to see you. But if you're able to understand them, have them understand you, and use the best skills that you've been taught to do that, in helping them get to where they want to go on their healthcare journey, can usually overcome any initial shock. And that's where, when you ask about resiliency, you have to have it, even when some initial encounters may not necessarily go the way you envision that they would, this kind of thing. So you have to keep those in mind. And also remember that it's a journey that we're taking, like everything in life. Our careers are as well. And there are points where it might seem that there's a certain level of tedium and a groundhog-like day experiences where I'm doing the same thing. But there are also those points where you have exponential change and you're able to make a real difference, not only for patients, but also in your own career. And that comes from having the help of mentors and others, and the support of your family and other programs that have gotten, things started in this country to help us be better physician scientists and leaders over time.
So for the people listening to this podcast today, what are the actionable things they can do right now to help improve the outcomes and to help recruit more Black boys into the field, into science, into medicine, and ultimately start to address this issue?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. I think the one thing was the pathway programs we talked about. So having those, and then also starting those earlier, is one. Also having a space for whenever you do recruit them, that they feel safe and comfortable, that they can also continue their career and also progress their career and not get stuck or drop out or other things of that nature. And other things it would be, I mentioned it also, would be creating more HBCU med schools.
So practical things that we can do?
Yeah, what are the actionable things that can be done right now to affect change?
I agree with pathways. I believe intentionality, as Dr. Horner talked about earlier today, and using our community. As we look out the windows from where we're sitting, there are multiple advertisements and pictures selling all kinds of things. Why can't we sell medicine? And we've started to do it, actually, in some ways. In my own specialty, for example, now, as we think about kidney disease, diabetes, we're seeing many more patients and their families who look like us in some of those advertisements. We'd never seen that before, number one. We're also seeing practitioners of medicine and the people dispensing the care and the medicine who look like us. And that will start some of the change. And then I think in families, asking, how can, I be helpful to my family and my community as a young child, as a young boy, and sort of keeping that flame going along with the pathway programs. And they have to start a lot earlier. As Dr. Ch.B. pointed out, it's much too late by the time we're even in college and medical school. Mm-hmm. We need to have these beforehand. And perhaps we'll get even more Myron roles where you can be a superstar sports individual, but at the same time realize I have to study as well. And I'm going to be a scholar and an athlete. And that would create, amazing opportunities for a lot of kids to want to keep this thing going. Because, if you're an athlete, you're probably in great health as well, this kind of thing, and that helps you. But being a scholar, you can think about it and pass that on. And then the peer mentorship, I think, is also important. And Louis, you pointed out that you had that, after school and this kind of thing. Whatever we can do to create sort of an academy of young people who really believe that they can accomplish this.
And you mentioned something great that I think is important to say, and that's that the mainstream institutions need to look at what the HBCUs are doing, but not think that gets them off the hook. Like, what can they do to step up?
Having the team to, have diverse individuals on it can be extremely helpful in growing the ability to bring in additional individuals and creating a safe space where people can grow. And as we expand the pool by expanding what HBCUs can do, accompanied by assistance, appropriate assistance from mainstream and or majority institutions, will create larger opportunities. And again, that's so important for our work on health disparities and how we eliminate those and opportunities to create more people who can be of assistance in that whole sphere.
Yes, and when you talk to patients from our community, are you more likely to emphasize prevention or to recognize things early on in the pathway?
Yes. What we all know as physicians, and each one of us can speak to this, I'm sure, by the time you get to see me as a physician, I'm a nephrologist. By the time you get to see me, things may be much too late. We're talking about dialysis, we're talking about transplantation, or we're talking about treating a very complex set of kidney problems that, can cause major problems with your health. And so anything that we can do to prevent it, is going to be a major thing. And so that opportunity is there for us as well. And again, having some level of congruence between a Black male physician talking to a Black male patient, or even an African-American patient, or minority patient for that matter, is tremendously helpful. And then if we also think of our importance, even maybe we're not even trained in it, but our importance in helping the public health situation in the country, we play a big role in helping people to understand how to do preventive things to keep their health as good as they can for the longevity of their life. And I'll just give one quote from William J. Mayo. It's on the walls of the Mayo Clinic. In addition to the needs of the patient come first, there's a quote that says, "The health of a nation is its greatest asset." And if we can get to that point where we're, changing that whole landscape for not only a certain segment of America, but for all Americans, and particularly in minority communities, we will have done something big, and getting more Black men into medicine will help that. There's no doubt in my mind.
Excellent. Dr. Roberts, I'm going to let you close out on what are the actionable things that can be done right now to address this issue.
I think I'll pick up from something that Dr. Greene just said, but also from something that Dr. Horn said in her talk, which was relating to the idea of infrastructure. And I think that it's really important that we think about building a sustainable long-term infrastructure and conceptually thinking about how we can build this. I think it's really important to think in a team manner. And I think Dr. Greene was just talking about partnerships between HBCUs and the larger majority academic institutions, for example. I think that's important to see that as part of a larger partnership. We need a partnership between communities, between academic institutions, and also between the government and industry. And recognize that we're all, to some degree, in this together because we all have interests in improving the overall health of the society. So figuring out ways that we can work together and build together, I think, is critical.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. You're making profound impact on society, and I'm so proud of all of you. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And for Mayo Clinic's Rise for Equity podcast, I'm Lee Hawkins. We'll see you next time.